Well, Lou, I'm here with Steve Hyden, and we're gonna get into a proper intro in a few minutes. But before we started rolling, Steve jumped in to with his desire to discuss Unfrosted, which I feel like you made a point. Could you just make the point again? And then we're going to talk about Bruce Springsteen today. And
Yeah.
this is a very special episode of Office Hours with one of my favorite music writers, Steve Hyden. I'll give you a proper intro, but let's do this cold open where you tell me your thoughts on Unfrosted.
Yeah. Well, I saw the clip of you talking about the Jerry Seinfeld Pop Tart movie, and I assumed that, Tim is going to crap on this movie like everyone else has. And I thought
Hmm.
your take was really interesting. You weren't saying it was like the funniest movie you'd ever seen, but you seemed sympathetic to what Seinfeld was trying to do, and you were actually kinder to it than a lot of people I've seen talking about it. And it was interesting to me because I thought when I was watching it, I didn't finish it. I had to
Uh-huh.
bail on it. But
Okay, fair enough.
when I was watching it, it did occur to me that, this would be a better movie if someone like Tim Heidecker did it.
Let me just set this up. So people listening, just want to introduce you formally. Steve Hyden is a music critic, an author, a podcast host. He's the author of Your Favorite Band Is Killing Me, Twilight of the Gods, The Long Road, about Pearl Jam's influence on a generation, co-host of the podcast IndieCast, and you do a podcast with our friends, the Jokermen.
Never-ending stories.
And you're a writer for Uprocks. You're always putting out these terrific lists. You're making these big decisions about the order of things of people's careers. I love that.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to. You've interviewed me, and now it's time for me to interview you, because you've got a new book coming out about one of my favorite artists, Bruce Springsteen, called "There Was Nothing You Could Do," about born in the U.S.A. and that record's cultural impact. And I read it. You sent me a copy a few months ago. I devoured it. There's nothing I love more than these kinds of books. And I can, we could talk about this genre in general too, or like the rock book genre,
Yeah.
and what works about it and what doesn't work about it sometimes. Like, I'm holding off on reading the Mal Evans book for some reason. That might be too into the weeds, but
I'm intrigued by that one
Beatles
too.
break. Yeah,
I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, Mal Evans, for those who don't know, the Beatles roadie.
Yes.
And one of the people in the inner circle, like from the beginning, really, of at least their superstar career. I don't know if he goes back to like Germany and all that.
I think he goes back to the Cavern. I know. I think he might not have been in Hamburg, but he was there. He was like a roadie at the Cavern. I'm not a roadie, a doorman, like a security guy. And you see him in the Get Back movie with the anvil. He's the
right.
Yeah,
and
he's very.
He seems like a very sweet guy. And then, do you know about how he died?
Yes, terrible. I mean, I don't know all the details. I know he was shot by the LAPD. Like, it was like a murder by suicide by cop kind of situation.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, and I don't know all the details of that, but it's a very, obviously a very tragic ending. But you just think of the guy in Get Back hitting the anvil, and then you remember that's how he went out. It's a very incongruous situation, but I don't know. I'm sure that's a fascinating book. The thing with Beatles books is that there's a million of them, but there's a million of them for a reason. It's like Greek mythology. You can just hear those stories over and over again.
I know. There's a good one. The one I just did read. It's an audiobook that I experienced, was the Peter Brown book, which was a book he wrote about. He had written it like in the 1980 or 1982, and he had interviewed everybody in the inner circle. And, he was in the inner circle. Peter Brown calls, say, you can make it okay. You can get married in Gibraltar near Spain. Peter Brown, he basically interviewed everybody and he recorded everyone. And what this book is the transcripts of everybody. It's pretty good. He interviews Alan Klein. He interviews Yoko, like people that you don't always hear their side of the story because I think Paul and Ringo and that side of it has really done such a good job of controlling the whole narrative. But and it was contemporaneous, sort of. It was like done in the late 70s. So you're hearing like what Paul thinks of John, months before John Lennon is killed.
Right,
so it's
right.
like it's not this revisionist history so much.
I have the audio book of that Mark Lewisohn book, like where he's writing.
That's
the enormous. I think it's going to be 3 volumes. In the first volume,
it's like the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, kind of,
or like that Lyndon Johnson book that Robert Caro wrote. But it's like 45 hours. This book, and it's up until and it's like even before they become famous. It's like just their early life.
Well, I mean the joke I have about that book is it starts in the year 1846 or something. that's where like. And I think it goes like the end of that volume is like 1962 is like, and it's 600 pages, right? So it's like, but I loved it. I think it really changed the way I thought about a lot of things with them. But again, we're not here to talk about Unfrosted. We're not here to talk about the Beatles. We're here to talk about Bruce, the boss. Tell me a little bit about this book. Specifically what your sort of thesis for this book was, and did you go into writing this book timing it with the 40th anniversary? Did you feel like that was coming and you're like, not to say that you're being manipulative or cynical, but did it seem like this was the time to sort of like reassess Born in the USA and talk about it a little more seriously?
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yes. Like I did have the 40th anniversary in mind and thinking, if the book comes out around then, that might be a way to encourage people to write about it. Like that's certainly something that crossed my mind, the marketing side of my brain. But, I've been wanting to write about Bruce for a long time, and he pops up in some of my other books too. Like he's in 3 of my other books. I write about Bruce a bit. But the problem with Bruce is that there's, like the Beatles, there's so many books about Springsteen, and it was trying to figure out like what would be the right vehicle to talk about him. And, eventually I just hit upon Born in the USA, which it's the kind of record that I think is interesting on its own, like the era that it came out of and how it's intertwined with Nebraska and how it became this huge phenomenon, all that stuff. But then there's also everything around the record, what it said about America at the time, what it says about rock music. And it seemed like it was a good opportunity to write about the changes that have happened in culture in the last 40 years, and also in Bruce Springsteen's own career. So like the book, it talks about not just the record; it talks about his career leading up to the Born in the USA and his career afterward. And the central thesis of the book basically is that the albums before Born in the USA are really setting the stage for Bruce becoming the phenomenon that he became in the mid-'80s. And then the albums after are, in a way, reacting to that, whether he's running away from it or learning to embrace it again. So it's not my favorite Bruce Springsteen record. I love it. But to me, it was the most interesting one to write about.
It is crazy to think, because you have what's the first, like, what's Greetings from Asbury Park, 73, 74, 73?
70, yeah.
So you have Bruce as this, slowly climbing this ladder of success, and, by the river, I guess you have, I mean, in my mind, I always think of Born to Run as this, where he becomes globally famous, or he becomes the icon Bruce Springsteen. But that's not really true. I mean, it was it became such a staple of classic rock stations for me growing up. And I think post Born in the USA, you get a lot of people finding that record, or, you get a lot of that gets swept up into the mythology. But he still isn't really, he's still like I don't know, you wouldn't say an underground artist, because he's on a major label and he's playing arenas and stuff, but he's not necessarily like a household name through the 70s.
Born to Run comes out, that record's a big hit, but you do see this pattern with Bruce where he has the big success and then he retreats a little bit, like with Darkness on the Edge of Town. At the time, that was looked at as not a very commercial record. He didn't do much promotion for it. There was a lot of feeling about Born to Run that it was like this overhyped record. He was on the cover of Time and Newsweek famously the same week.
The new Dylan or something like that.
Yeah, all that. And there's stories about just Bruce being really uncomfortable with all of the hype around that record. And he scales back with Darkness. The River comes out. He has Hungry Heart. It's a top 10 hit. First big pop hit for him. And then after The River, of course, you move into this era where he's working on Nebraska and Born in the USA at the same time. And Nebraska obviously is another retreat type record in a way. And then Born in the USA comes out and it sells, 15 million some copies and has 7 top 10 hits. Just the epitome of a monster 80s record in the mold of like Thriller or Purple Rain, like these albums that just stick around forever and just keep putting out hit singles. Which is something you don't really see anymore. Like a record that can just linger forever, or not, for like 18 months in the cultural zeitgeist.
And somehow he doesn't, like, the record is a sonic departure from maybe the sound you're used to from Bruce a little bit. I mean, you get the introduction of the Yamaha CS80. You get the synthesizer. I was trying to be too cute here, but it is, and I'm not looking at notes. I mean, that's just from my memory.
Yeah, I know, off the dome.
But that's synth. That we get a synth sound from Bruce, but he doesn't lose his audience. He, exponentially gains an audience. I mean, you like going from arenas to stadiums. Pretty significant. I don't think he was doing stadiums before Born in the USA.
Yeah, I mean, The River, I think, was approaching that type of level, and then it really blows up. I mean, Bruce, and I think this is still true today, like, I mean, the early 80s was the beginning of him going into Europe, and now he's, like, bigger in Europe than he is in America. Like, he's talked about that. And, like, the stadium part of the Born in the USA tour started in Europe and then it came to America. But yeah, the synthesizer thing is interesting. And I'm kind of curious about your own journey with Bruce. I don't know if you want to get into that, but because I read in the book about how I heard this album when I was like really little, when I was 6 years old. And it was one of the first albums that I remember hearing as an album. It was this album, obviously Thriller. If you're around our age, like Thriller was just part of the world. You didn't even have to be a Michael Jackson fan. It was like a record that was just issued to like every young person at the time. But yeah, Born in the USA I loved, and I loved it before I really even knew anything about Bruce Springsteen. He was just a pop star. He was a guy on MTV. Yeah. And the synthesizer, I think, was it was one of the things that made him feel like a mainstream artist, because that was becoming more of a dominant thing. Yeah,
it was smart. It strategically, I don't think it was that callously strategic where they're trying to make it sound like everything else on the radio, but it did probably have, Bruce wants, part of Bruce, and I'm sure John Landau and everybody else wants to be as big as possible. They want to sell as many records as possible. They want to reach as many people. And I'm sure at that point, there's the conversation and the desire to make it sound current and fit in with what else is on the radio to some degree. I think
Well,
that can happen organically, but I'm sure it's in the, these people that get this big it's not just accidental. There's pain and work and deliberation to get to that place. And I'm sure part of that is just like, this is what Prince is doing, man. Like, we got to get on it. You got to stay on top of it.
Well, it seems like it was fairly organic in that, my friend Brian Hyatt, he wrote a Springsteen book, and I quoted in my book, he interviewed Roy Bittan, the keyboard player in the E Street Band, and it sounds like Roy was the one who brought the synthesizer to the sessions. Like, it was something that he had picked up,
right?
And it wasn't something that he was directed to do, but it was something that Bruce, I think, recognized fairly early on was, oh, this is like musical dry ice smoke. It creates atmosphere on my records. And it's one of the things that links the songs on Born in the USA. You think of the synths on I'm on Fire or Downbound Train. It is like this cloud of moodiness that exists. And it's not like a Rick Wakeman type synth. It's not like an elaborate type thing. It's pretty simple. Like
it's just pads. It's pads.
Right.
It's like,
but it's very effective. One
thing
I
love. I was just gonna say I love records that have that kind of glue, that for like random ones that I can think of, like Dylan's Desire has Scarlet Riviera and Emmylou Harris on it, and they kind of play throughout the record in different ways, and there's lots of examples of that. But it just says like this is meant, all these songs belong together, not just thematically but sonically as well.
Or you think about the way Dylan used organ in the mid-'60s.
Yeah.
And how that became something that a lot of other people picked up on, like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers had that same organ sound. Even like E Street Band has that on, Born to Run, Darkness on the Edge of Town era. And I think Born in the USA was one of the records that brought the synthesizer into that heartland rock type sound. Like if you think about the Killers or War on Drugs or something, like that's something that they pick up on.
For sure. Well, I could tell you. Yeah. Oh, so go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say it's interesting to me with this record because I think, because again, you and I are around the same age, so I don't know if you were already a Bruce fan in the '90s.
Well,
or anything.
I was going to give you my and the audience's history of my Bruce love, but is that a good time to do that?
Because I was just going to say, I feel like in the '90s, his like a record like Born in the USA and even like Tunnel of Love were looked at as being dated because of the synthesizers. And,
totally.
But then 20 years after those records came out, those sounds came back into vogue in like indie rock and whatever.
Big time.
The records didn't change, but the way they were perceived changed. But like the alt rock '90s though, or grunge, if that's what you liked, Born in the USA maybe sounded kind of corny in the '90s.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think about like even with Bon Iver, like the way he tapped into like this kind of Bruce Hornsby sound,
right?
Which was shocking and great, but very like, oh my God, this was very recently very uncool.
Right.
And you just figured out a way to tap into it. But definitely the War on Drugs. And my last record, high school, we had the CS80 pumping in the back of a bunch of things, giving some atmosphere. But I'm about your age, and I would say Bruce for me is totally ubiquitous. Like I can't remember any period of time where he's not around as a cultural person in my life. I think so. This comes out in 1980, right? Born in the USA.
84.
So 84. I'm sorry. Yeah, that makes more sense. The River is 80, right?
Right. Yeah.
So in 1984, I'm 8, right? 76. Wait, I'm born in 76. I'm 8 in 1984. So I'm probably just finding music, finding MTV, and there's if you're watching MTV in 1984, you are seeing a lot of Bruce Springsteen. You're seeing Dancing in the Dark video with Courtney Cox. You're seeing Glory Days. Glory Days is probably the first big memory of something on MTV. That video is very, evocative.
Yeah.
And my dad was a fan. He had gotten the tape. I can picture the cassette tape. And I could hear "Cover Me" on the radio. That song was on the radio a lot. "Born in the USA," of course. And then I don't. It's funny because then I think Bruce kind of drops off like after those probably 2 or 3 years of the "Born in the USA" cycle. You get "Tunnel of Love," which I'm now not into because I'm probably into heavy metal and rap and stuff. Like suddenly he goes from like the most important, hottest thing to kind of dad music, like within one album, right?
Right. Yeah, he's got the bolo tie and the suit.
Yeah,
writing about relationships,
divorce.
Yeah,
but then I think as a high schooler, I get into the classic rock, 60s and 70s. I am a Rolling Stones subscriber. I learn about the first wave. So I get Greetings from Asbury Park, and I get the Young and the Wild E Street Shuffle. I start to really like that because it's in that canon of Dylan, Tom Petty, the Stones, all that stuff. He's in that mix, and I'm a fan. I've got all those CDs. And then I think in college I dig into the Darkness record, which you kind of have to be in college, I think, or later to get to appreciate. Right. And I did, and I think in post college you start getting, for us at least, I think you start getting the revisionist indie rock mindset of Nebraska. It's sort of around the same time where people are rediscovering Ram from McCartney,
right?
Where people are going, well, I know Bruce Springsteen just put out fucking Lucky Town and he's lame, but you guys should check out Nebraska. It's actually fucking good, and you're like, really? Oh, cool. I didn't know that I could like Bruce Springsteen again. I think I always liked Bruce Springsteen, but I didn't go that deep, and I didn't maybe know about Nebraska or didn't pay attention to Nebraska. But then, yeah, so in that 2001, this all tracks for you, right? Like 2001, 2002, I think there's like people saying Nebraska is fucking cool. And I'm like, well, I like all of it. Have you guys heard Darkness? Do you know about Racing in the Streets? Like this is not a aberration here.
Right.
And yeah, so I think that I post Nebraska, I think, or post Born in the USA, I think I really liked when I liked that record Magic that came out that has that great song, Girls in Their Summer Clothes,
right? Which
blew me away. I go, like, how do you, a guy can still pump out something like so anthemic and beautiful, and he sounds like he's having fun getting like a 60s Phil Spector kind of sound going in the studio. And yeah, so and I liked the Wrecking Ball record. I think kind of had cool things about it. He got real political again, and like kind of went through that phase. And now, and I'll wrap my appreciation of Bruce up by just saying, I think now we're in sort of like an Elvis Costello, I'm a music aficionado of genres kind of phase, right? Like I'm going to take a step back from a songwriter Bruce and, explore different subgenres of music, the way that Elvis Costello, did his various Burt Bacharach and string quartets. He's like, it feels slightly like I'm going to figure out different ways of making records that don't necessarily need me to be the lead idea generator. Sunny days are here again. Hi, this is Tim Heidecker, your office hours host, letting you know about Factor meals. It's time to meet your wellness goals in time for the summer, and Factor is here to help you. They've got chef-crafted meals that are ready to eat in just 2 minutes. They're dietitian approved and will help you kickstart a new, healthy routine for the summer. I know you're all asking, what are Tim's current top faves? Well, I'll tell you. The filet mignon and mushroom risotto and the calorie-smart Greek chicken and tomato penne pasta. Those are my top picks that you just can't go wrong with. But guess what? They have 35 different meal options every week with over 60 add-ons available. So if you can't find something you like, well, that's on you, buddy. What are you waiting for? Head to factormeals.com/officehours50 and use code officehours50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code officehours50 at factormeals.com/officehours50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active.
Well, obviously, there was that Soul Covers record that he did, which
Yeah.
I have no interest in. I have to say that's not my favorite side of Bruce. Western Stars, which was him writing songs, but it was
That was original, yeah.
But that was more of a genre exercise. Him, doing like the Western, like the California singer-songwriter type vibe, and wearing the cowboy hat, all that thing.
He did like the Pete Seeger kind of with like the Irish.
We Shall Overcome.
But it's all good. Yeah, it's all cool. It's just like it's interesting. Like as an artist gets older and older, how they manage to find new ways to not reinvent, because I don't think there's any reinvention going on, but spice. Get a new lacquer of paint on the outside of their house kind of attitude, but.
Yeah, like Letter to You is interesting because that's almost him proving that he can still sound like he did in the 70s. Like there was an interview that he did in Rolling Stone where he was talking about all these lost albums that he has. There's tons of still unreleased music, and he was saying that I can still sing in my voice from 1978, or I could sing in my voice from 1984, or I could sing in my voice from 73, which seemed like a little bit, I don't know, he seems pretty damn raspy. I don't know how flexible he really is, but there are songs on Letter to You where he does plug into that darkness, like that song, Janie Needs a Shooter, which actually is an old song, but that's a great just throwback Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah,
song.
I like that. I like that record. I think I really wish some of these guys would. I think Dylan is a good example of doing it right, because I don't think he's working with one of these hot shot producers. I think there is this, like that new Stones record I fucking hate. Did you like it?
I have some affection for it, but I am such a easy A when it comes to the Stones. Like I'll defend Bridges to Babylon, to people. So, but I know what you mean about the sound.
Maybe that's the way I am. Maybe I'm the same way with Jerry Seinfeld. Like whatever. Like you should be more critical of the Rolling Stones. Like why do they get a free pass? But I just think like when these guys end up getting these young. I can't remember this guy's name who works with all these old timers. Producer, you probably
Andrew
know.
Watt. Andrew Watt is his name. Yeah, it's a very plasticky type of sound that he gets.
Yeah, and I think Bruce, I think he works with who? Brendan O'Brien, is that his name?
He's worked with him like recently. He has like an in-house guy whose name escapes me, but he did work with Brendan O'Brien for a while. I mean, Dylan, I think, has just been producing himself really since Time Out of Mind. I think Jack Frost, he produces under that name.
Jack Frost, yeah.
I mean, I was curious about like your feelings about Bob versus Bruce. I mean, because I write about this a bit in the first chapter of the book about Bruce being influenced by like Elvis and Bob Dylan, these other sort of great men
Yeah.
archetypes in rock history, and how in a lot of ways they're opposing archetypes. But I'm fascinated by the relationship between Bob and Bruce because it does feel
Yeah.
like sometimes I think Bob admires Bruce in a lot of ways, but I also feel like at times maybe he resents Bruce and wants to make fun of him in a good-natured
Yeah.
way, because they are different
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, like the way they approach their careers, performing or in the studio. I mean, they're very different.
So different. I mean, very, very different. Of course, I think you just don't have Bruce Springsteen without
Of
Bob.
course, of course.
You just don't. You don't have so many things without Bob. Um, there is that feeling, I guess, that you can understand of Bob being like, I made everything that you have, like, but I don't know how, I mean, at some point you get over that and you go, whatever. The kid's good and he seems like a nice guy, I think the differences are vast. I mean, I think musically, Bruce Springsteen is much more gifted, like if just from a singing and guitar playing and just seems that he has more talent in the actual music. I mean the combination of Elvis, I mean it's Elvis, it's Bob, I mean it's Elvis, it's Bob, it's James Brown, it's Little Richard. Like from a performer standpoint, there's nobody better, I think, as an entertainer than Bruce Springsteen. Like
Right.
one of the greatest. Like you can watch that I watched that No Nukes concert that came out recently. Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God. Like it's unbelievable what he does with the audience, with his body, because his guitar playing is exceptional. Like he's the guy soloing on all those songs, right? Like
very slept on as a guitar player. People don't talk about him as one of the
crazy.
greats.
He's crazy good. He's for 3 hours, he's running in a full flop sweat, jumping on top of the piano, flying across the stage, totally engaged emotionally with the songs. Like Bob's not doing any of that. You know what I mean? Like you get a little of that in Rolling Thunder, where he's just on cocaine,
Right.
Which I love that move. I love those concerts. I think that's like prime him as a performer. But
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
But I think Bruce is probably like a better. I mean, he's definitely like seems like a guy that's worked on himself in a much more productive way, or he's just seems to have a good family. He's never been very antagonistic to the public or to the press. Like he's kind of like the anti-Bob in that way. Like,
right.
But there's also not as much originality in Bruce. Maybe not as much coming out of nothing is this thing. Like there's such a root in other things that Bruce provides for us. It's not.
Yeah,
it's so rooted in many things. And Bob too. Bob didn't come out of nowhere. He's obviously coming from folk traditions, and he's not like a full broken mold situation. But
the thing with Bob is, you're talking about Springsteen as this ultimate showman, which he is, and Dylan isn't. But one of the great things about Dylan is that he's not that.
Yes.
If you love Bob Dylan, you love that he is a guy who isn't going to give you what you want, but it will be the thing that you want in 10 years. It'll be like he's going to give you this record of standards from like the mid 20th century. And you're going to be like, why is he doing 3 albums of this? And then one day you're going to be in a perfect moment to hear those records, and you'll be like, it's genius that he did this.
Yes.
And yes. Bruce doesn't have that kind of thing going for him. That's really just Bob's thing. But you're right. I mean, there wouldn't be a Springsteen without Bob. And also Springsteen maybe wouldn't have made the decisions that he made, that he learned Like he learned what not to do from Bob too, just like he learned what not to do
Yeah.
from Elvis in a lot of ways.
Well, he was so very strategic, and I mean, we could talk about that, the way he deliberated, the way he took time to make all those records in that period, and the pain that he seemed to go through with it all, like, and how I think it's probably something now that he says he went through extensive therapy. I mean, there's great stories that I think are in your book, and I think might be in his own autobiography. The one that really struck me, I think it's in his autobiography is great. I mean, that's a great, beautiful piece of work.
One of the best audiobooks too of all time.
Oh, I've never did the audiobook. I would do that.
You have to.
I was sitting on the corner of Bedford and drinking some warm beers with Mary.
It is peak raspiness. It's this raspiness at your eardrums for like 16 hours. It's a beautiful thing.
You know, it's a bummer is that Bob didn't do the audiobook for his. I mean, Sean Penn did a pretty good job.
Yeah,
I think I just listened to that recently, but I just want to hear Bob talking about meeting Tiny Tim up in Times Square.
Especially, he should have done it for Philosophy of Modern Song at least, because
I think he did some of that.
He did some of it, but I think there's like a cast of celebrities who read that one, because that's written more like the theme time radio hour entry. Yeah. So it'd be
meaning somebody else wrote it.
Right. It's like, this woman was a beast. She killed me. You know,
I couldn't get enough.
She left me in a ditch, bloody, dying, but I loved it. You know, like that kind of prose.
He's a great writer. I mean, obviously he's a great writer. I wish he'd write like pulp fiction, you know, like he'd write some like mystery novels or something. He should start doing that. That's a new angle.
He may have there might be like a backlog of books that comes out after he passes, you know. Just knowing him, or some weird backlog of material, you know, welded statues or something that he's hoarding in Malibu, or because he's like into welding. Bob Dylan.
Yes,
it's like one of his hobbies.
Look that up, folks. If you don't know, Bob Dylan makes big gates, and you know who has one? My friend. This is funny. My friend does. He's a videographer, director guy, and he does a lot of work with, like Elton John Foundation, and he does a lot of work with the presidents, like for their charity groups. You know, like he makes films for them. You know, like EPKs or whatever you want to call it. And he got to be sort of pals with Bill Clinton, you know, because he's making these films about Bill Clinton's the Clinton Foundation, you know, where they suck the adrenochrome out of kids and you know turn it into the vaccine. But he goes, I was walking around he was showing me his garden area, and you see that gate? Bob Dylan gave that to me. He's like, what? He had no idea what he was talking about. But yeah, Bob Dylan makes big iron gates.
Yeah, man of many talents.
But
Bruce, I don't know if he has those kind of hobbies. You never hear about Bruce's hobbies.
No.
Bruce and he seems
like motorcycles, I guess. I don't know, cars. Right. I loved, there's so many great things. I brought his autobiography up because recently, I think I think Bruce, like Bob and like a lot of these guys, like they come back to you in different parts of your life as you get older, and as I go through the changes I'm going through, and personal life, family, career, and then there's these guys that are ahead of you, like Bruce, where you reconnect with them on a different level. And the one thing that hit me, I think this was in his book, but I think it might have also come back up in the other big Bruce book that came out last year, the Deliver Me from Nowhere, about Nebraska, which, I mean, I don't know how you feel about it. I think that book and your book make the best two for Bruce. I mean, it's almost like it's an unintentional sequel to his book. It came out perfectly because I had read that book, and then you sent me your book, and it was like, this is what I was craving. I wanted to read more about this period.
Yeah,
But
hopefully other people feel the same way, because I think that's true, and also because of the subject matter, and also we took different approaches to it.
yeah, for
So
sure.
hope, yeah,
It wasn't redundant in any way. But there's a part of that book where, and maybe you remember this, where he's driving across country after having kind of like a nervous breakdown. I
right,
think before, like right after the river, maybe, right? Is it right after the river?
yeah,
Or around that time, definitely before Nebraska, and Born in the USA. But he's driving across country to California, where he eventually lands into a psychoanalyst's arms, literally like collapses or just kind of starts weeping. But on his way out there, he stops at this county fair, and he has this totally existential observation, watching the people in wherever he is, Minnesota or Iowa or something,
I think it's
you know,
Texas.
Texas. And
Yeah,
he's just like, I can't have this. I can't have this life. I am an outsider. I'm a carnival. I'm an artist. I'm a carny, essentially. I can't have a normal life. I am a man. I'm a man on the road. And this, melancholy or depression about that feeling, I totally relate to, and you realize that you do have because it's this feeling of uh, looking at a community and being like, I don't have a community, I don't have a family, I don't have anything. I want that. I want the dad with the cotton candy, looking at his kid on the roller coaster. But I think you eventually realize that no one really feels that connected to their own communities in the
right.
way that it might look. And secondly, that you do have a community and you do have a family, and it is just different. It doesn't look like it looks on the cover of Life magazine necessarily.
Yeah,
But it struck me as like feeling like you are and it's also because his work, his vocation in life is to observe, and I feel the same way a lot of ways. We are observers of the world and the culture. We're not always active participants in it, and it can be kind of alienating and lonely.
I think Bruce in particular though is a loner. Like he wasn't in the traveling Wilburys, like he
No.
wasn't. You don't really see him hanging out with other people all that often. Like he'll drop in and appear on someone's record, but someone like Tom Petty, for instance, seemed like he was a great hang and just had a lot of
Hmm.
famous friends, and you know, going over to George Harrison's house and playing ukuleles. That
Yeah.
famous story. That story you were telling about the cross country trip, which I write about a bit in my book too, because it is an important part of the creation story of Born in the USA. But he had a quote after Born in the USA came out. I think it was for the album. It was for the album cycle for Tunnel of Love. And he had a quote, and I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, but he said something like, "I went out on the Born in the USA tour and I talked a lot about community, but I wasn't part of a community."
Yeah.
And he was talking about how, this is around the time he meets Patty. He's going to start having kids. He's going to start having a personal life
Yeah.
for the first time, and how that really became, I think, more important to him than being Bruce Springsteen and making records, as it should be. I mean, he was entering his 40s. It was a new part of his life. It is interesting with Springsteen, like in the last 10 years, because I feel like he has been more forthcoming about his personal life and the struggles that he's gone through.
Yeah.
Certainly with mental health, he writes about that a lot in his book Born to Run. There was also Springsteen on Broadway. He talks about that
Loved
stuff.
that.
That's
Loved
great.
that.
And I love the bit at the beginning where he says something like, I've never worked a 9-to-5 job until
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
show.
Yeah, he's a
Like,
character. He admits, he's like, I created a character. I'm an
right.
archetype. I don't know anything about cars. But
Yeah, I'm not a working man. I'm not, and that to me also feels like a reaction to the icon that Born in the USA created.
yeah,
People had this perception of who he was based on that record, and it was before that too. But that record was just so mainstream and iconic. And it's still, I think, the record that if you ask the average person about Bruce Springsteen, like picture him in your mind, it's the Bruce of Born in the USA. I mean, I think that is the most sort of common touchstone for him. And you feel like he's been trying, even now, like last 10 years, like addressing that and distancing himself from that a little bit, being like, no, I'm just a songwriter, you know, and I create songs. I'm not how I've been presented in the culture.
Well, yeah, it's amazing because he's such a contradiction, because so many things about that period reinforce the idea of creating a very strong archetype of something, like, and even like, let's take the cover for example, like it is synonymous with what I think of 1980s America, the USA, the branding of America as kind of a corporate idea, you know, of
Right.
like Pepsi Cola, America, like a certain way we picture America when we close our eyes. Is that like the chicken or the egg situation? Like this,
Right.
It's just a photo of Bruce's butt in front of an American flag, you know?
Yeah. But it communicates so much. There's like
yeah.
a working class thing there. There's like a sex symbol thing there.
Yeah.
There is a, you know, again, like every man, you know, whoever you are, you're welcome to the world that this record is creating. And,
Right.
you know, that thing you said about America as a corporate product or corporate idea, you know, when you read what people were writing about Bruce in the mid 80s, whether they were on the left or the right, one of the common things that comes up a lot is Bruce Springsteen is a symbol of like American ingenuity at its best. Like he delivers a product that's well made. He works hard. He's very competent at his job. And, you know, people were feeling that America wasn't competent at a lot of things at that time. And so that was how he was talked about. And there's a double-edged sword to that, obviously, because they're praising him, but they're also reducing him, you know, to this rah-rah idea. And I think that was part of what he ended up reacting against.
Well, it's funny. There is so much striving and working and trying going on with Bruce Springsteen, you know, and then 10 years later, you have the grunge movement of it's lame to care, you know, and
right.
the contradiction of Bruce, you know, in those stadium shows where he's really like pushing it hard, you know, he's like, you know, fully in it, that became corny to care and try that hard and prance around that way, and look to be having so much fun.
Right. Yeah. And there's a lot of people who still think that's corny. I mean, I have friends who hate Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
And they'll clown him all the time. And there are, you know, he, like the saxophone and the facial expressions and the raspiness and the sleeveless shirts and all this stuff. Like there are things that you can poke fun at.
Yeah. I mean, if you want, let's take a minute and like goof on Bruce a little bit, because I think that could change the mood a little bit. First of all, like, I think the past several years of touring, there is like I saw him like 10 years ago. It was great. I was singing along the whole time. It was so fun and so moving. But when I see videos of him now, it feels like I wouldn't have as much fun, because it feels a little too much like he's the host of a Bruce Springsteen party. You know, like there's a lot of like it struck me, and maybe he was doing this 10 years ago, but he's doing Born to Run maybe, or something from Born to Run, and he's smiling and he's letting the audience sing half the song and he's having fun, and they seem totally disconnected from the song itself. You know what I mean? Where the song lyrically and emotionally is a painful, confessional, you know, dramatic song that if you look at him at the Hammersmith 1975 or No Nukes or something, you see like a guy fully invested in what that song is about. And now it's sort of like a trip down memory lane. It could be, you know, it could be Herman's Hermits out there singing Mrs. Brown, you know, like, come on, everybody, you know, baby, we were born to run, you know.
I
And
mean,
there's a little less of his investment in the song.
I think
maybe.
for a song like that, you could make that accusation. I will say that I think the more recent songs that he was playing, and this is probably true of like most artists of his vintage, the songs that people care less about are the songs that the artists care more about. And there's like a lot of mortality songs on like Letter to You that he's playing on this tour that I think he is invested in. But you know, there is a moment, and I think he does this every night on this tour, because I saw him last year and I loved it. I thought it was great. But
I'm sure I would love it. I mean, I'm sure I would. It was, and I'll let you finish there, but it was also like, I think when you're watching fan videos of, you know, people's cell phones, things are super bright. Have you noticed this? Like, it can't be as bright as it looks on these phones when you're there. Like it feels so blown out. And but anyways, so I'm watching it in the worst possible conditions.
Well,
to make this a point.
This would support your case. Like, there's a moment I think in every show where they do 10th Avenue Freeze Out in the encore, and Bruce rips open his shirt.
Yeah.
And he's stalking around with his shirt open, and like his taut old man pectorals are like poking out at you, and he looks like one of the Expendables, you know, that Sly Stallone movie.
How often do you think Bruce gets his haircut these days? Have you noticed this haircut of his? Is he like going to be in the zone of interest too? Is that what he's going for? I want to go for the Adolf Eichmann.
That's so funny. I hadn't thought about that, but you're totally right. The zone of interest haircut. He saw his zone of interest, and he's like, "Oh, I like the haircut. I want that haircut."
You think it's too much to go out there in that Nazi uniform? It looks so good. Yeah, Bruce, I don't think that's a good idea. You know, I think maybe not the look you're going for. All right. But I mean, what about him and Stevie? Him and Stevie with like the Three Stooges routine that they've been doing on stage too, where they're like patting each other on the head, doing the slaps. What's that?
Right.
Where's that coming from? Is that just? It seems consistent, right? Are they doing that a lot?
There's always, I feel like he does a lot of that shtick. Well, he did it with Clarence, obviously, when he was alive. There was like a Clarence and Bruce shtick, and then he would do it with Nils Lofgren. Like Nils Lofgren doing like flips and rolling around.
Really?
And, yeah, because he's a gymnast.
Oh, is he? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't know if he still does the flips, but I feel like there's a moment every show where he plays a guitar solo and he's just like spinning really fast while he's doing the guitar solo.
Right. I never liked the Nils Lofgren like look, you know, with the big top hat.
Right.
And I don't like. This is so pointless to care about, but I don't like that he's like a finger. He plays with his finger. He plays with his thumb or something. Like there's annoying things about Nils Lofgren to me personally.
You know, there is an element of Bruce, and this is also true, I think, of like Jagger and maybe even McCartney. Not true of Dylan. Like Dylan makes no attempt to hide the fact that he's in his 80s. You see him live. He's a man in his 80s. He sings like that. The songs reflect that, and I think it's one of his strengths that he's aged. Yeah. He's not trying to be Dylan in 65. Like,
there's no trip down memory lane with him. There's not an oldies review. Like, if you go see Dylan now, he's doing 70% new record or 60% new record, which I love.
And if he's playing old songs, he's playing them in his current style. He's not trying to sound like the 70s. Yeah. Whereas Springsteen and someone like Jagger, they have this need to show that they have this physical vitality still. And they do. They're both still amazing performers. I saw the Stones a few years ago. I'm defending the Stones again, but I thought they were great. Jagger's like, he has the weirdest body ever. But, you know, there is this need with Springsteen, like just like with his body, to prove like, no, I'm still what I was. In a way, that goes back to Born in the USA, too, because that was like the first time where he was pumping iron and he was muscular. Like, you look at Bruce in the late 70s, and he's like a scrawny guy. And then with Born in the USA, he's, you know, a few years before that, again, a very 80s type thing. He's like pumping iron every day. Yeah. And now he's like this muscle-bound dude. And yeah, like people don't want to see Bruce Springsteen be an old man, even though we know he's older. He still has to kind of present this image, and yeah, I don't know how long you can maintain that. I wonder how long he's going to be able to do shows on this level, if he will ever transition to like what Dylan is doing, where he's playing theaters and it's more laid back.
Yeah,
But that doesn't seem like, you'd feel like physically he'd have to do that, but it doesn't seem in line with his philosophy as a performer.
I think if he looks at that Broadway show as like a way to do something where he can sit down and then tour that show, I'm sure that's on the table. But let's do this for a sec, Steve. We're gonna take a short break and continue talking for a few more. If you got a few more, you got some time?
I got as much time as you need.
Okay,
yeah.
Let's talk another like 20 minutes, 30 minutes or so. But we'll put that up on the Patreon.